You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Kim Cella of Citizens for Modern Transit and Sheila Holm of AARP to discuss how they're transforming transit stops in St. Louis. We chat about how they involve the community, engage transit operators, and bring life to gray spaces. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with RailVolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues or more information about the annual conference live in Miami, go to railvolution.org. That's railvolution.org. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous Patreon supporters. Thanks for supporting each month. We really appreciate it. To join this merry band of zoning nerds and infrastructure wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. Heavy knit bus or bike only, or lightweight bike only with fading checkerboard design. Sign up at patreon.com/theoverheadwire and I'll send one right along. You can also purchase the scarves at theoverheadwire.com. Get your fresh Elmo or fresh Kermit before winter arrives. Order now at theoverheadwire.com. Also, because we do a lot of episodes covering a lot of books, we've partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on the show and help keep us interviewing them, that would be tremendous. All the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. And finally, check out the Overhead Wire Daily Newsletter, established in 2006. We were doing it way before anyone else thought it was cool. Join thousands of readers and sign up for a 2-week trial at theoverheadwire.com to check it out. That's a 2-week free trial at theoverheadwire.com. Well, Kim Cella and Sheila Holm, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? We'll start with Kim and we'll go with Sheila after that.
Sure. I am the Executive Director of Citizens for Modern Transit. That is the regional transit advocacy organization in the St. Louis region. So we don't own or operate the transit system, but we challenge, champion, and build grassroots support for public transit in the St. Louis region. And I'm also the Executive Director of the Missouri Public Transit Association. So we represent all transit providers in the state of Missouri.
And I'm Sheila Holm, and I am with AARP based in the St. Louis region. And I am all things AARP. I do community outreach. I engage on all different levels of AARP in the hood here in St. Louis. So, and I am fortunate to be on the board of Citizens for Modern Transit and Missouri Public Transit Association. So I am deeply entrenched in transit.
How did you all get involved in transit? Like, what was your first experience, maybe when you were younger, that made you say, oh, this is really cool. This is something I want to be involved in?
Well, I'll start. So growing up in the St. Louis region, transit's not really looked at as something you want to use, unfortunately. But my grandparents lived in the DC area, and that's a mainstay. And I rode a bus for the first time, a public bus, when I was 10 years old. And I first was frightened, but second thought, how cool is this? You can look around, you don't have to do anything but observe. And that was my first introduction to public transit.
So when I graduated college, I came back to St. Louis and I was not familiar with public transit, and I jumped right in with both feet. So my first job was with Citizens for Modern Transit, and I have been here for 29 years. I did have a brother who was disabled, and part of the reason I love this job so much is that I saw the need for people of every walk of life who needed to be able to have access. And I knew, after my brother was injured, it was a whole new perspective on how to get around and maintain your independence. And that's a critical role of public transit in the St. Louis region. So that's kind of driven part of my work since then as well. And so now here I am 29 years later, and I am deeply embroiled in public transit in all ways in the St. Louis area and the state of Missouri. But I think a large part of that was in college when my brother was injured, and coming out of that, looking at access and independence and how important it is for everyone to have that.
I think that really led me to getting into public transit once I started with AARP, because the number one thing when I started asking older adults, what's important to you? What do we need to do? And transportation was number one. And then Kim and I met, and the rest has been history, so to speak.
Or we're writing history now. We're not quite sure.
You're not history. You're writing history. That's good.
Living history.
I love that. Exactly. Well, we're going to talk about transforming transit stops, but my first question is, what was the first time where you saw a transit stop that you thought to yourself, it needs a little bit of help?
So Sheila and I have been working together for quite some time. I would say almost a decade, Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to doing some of this transformation that we're going to be talking about, Jeff, Sheila and I looked at a lot of the transit stations in the St. Louis market and said, oh, these need some help. And many of the stations in St. Louis a decade ago, 15 years ago, had nothing around them but a sea of parking. And so when we initially dipped our toes into this placemaking around transit, we started with pop-up events around public transit stops. What could be? So we did demonstration events, maybe 2 or 3 hours long, and activated the space around the transit stops. And that was really our first foray into the conversation about what could happen around these transit stops. And so our work pretty much progressed from there. But initially, it was Sheila and I talking about the fact that there's nothing around this stop. There's no activity. It's not a part of the fabric of the community. There's no reason for anyone to stop. There's no one sitting. I mean, it was truly a pass through rather than an interactive part of the community. And we knew we wanted to do something. So starting with a pop-up seemed like the best first step. And then we have kind of progressed from there, and we are where we are today.
I think, the second piece of that is then after we started doing the pop-ups, we did audits of a couple stations that really then led us to, well, what could we do about that? What kind of impact could we have? And that's when we started bricks and mortar kind of stuff.
And what does a transformation of a transit stop mean specifically? What are you talking about when you're talking about transformation? And I'm kind of getting deeper into the weeds in terms of the words, but what does it mean to actually transform a station?
I think from our perspective, it really is, we're not building big stuff. Okay. It's not a TOD. It's not transit-oriented development. It really is trying to create a sense of place at the station. It's to make it more enjoyable. It's so that it responds to the needs and interests of the individuals who use the stop, and use it meaning the transit riders, the operators, anyone that comes to that passes by the station. So it's the community at large, but it's not huge. It's, what's important to you and how can we transform this space within our limited budget and create a sustainable space for years to come.
And I think part of what has happened is a lot of these stations are an afterthought in these communities or in these neighborhoods. They're not really a part of what is happening in those areas. They're not a part of the fabric of the community. And what we found when we focused on these stations is that by engaging the community, we make sure we're delivering something that the community really wants or needs. In our first pilot project, it was an afterthought adjacent to a parklet with nothing around it. And by engaging the community, we found they wanted a front porch to their downtown Main Street. It was a bus stop. And we were able to deliver that, Jeff, just by listening to the community. It's a soft touch. It's not massive infrastructure, but that soft touch on those sites is bringing increased investment to some of the stops that we've already looked at and we've already completed. And I think part of it is just opening the dialogue and changing the dialogue around what public transit could be rather than this afterthought or this side piece that sits over here and we only use it if we're going to get on the bus or we're going to get on the train or we're going to connect. So this makes it important not only to the riders, but the residents and the surrounding businesses as well.
Using the example of Maplewood, when we took this stop that was completely separated from the rest of the community, it was for those people, whoever those people are. And now we have everybody that just sits in one of the shelters because it's cool. Because one of them has a glider, and so they just will sit in it and glide. It feels like it's part of the community, as Kim was stating, and that's really been a goal for every stop, is that it becomes more of, oh yeah, transit's cool, let's go use it.
So how does that work to open up to the community? How do you initially engage with groups that are a part of the neighborhood that maybe didn't feel like they were engaged with before?
So Sheila and I like to do these projects at the height of being the most challenging time. So our first pilot project was in the beginning of the pandemic. So we had to be very creative, Jeff, in how initially when it started, the pandemic hadn't yet happened. So we had community meetings. We actually partnered with local businesses, a local coffee house adjacent to this bus stop, and held community meetings and let people pretty much charrette style, but neighborhood charrette style. So people drew pictures of what they wanted to see, and we had a facilitator, and we did all that really good stuff. We also did survey work, and we went door to door and met with every business along that main street. And so our first jump into this permanent placemaking in Maplewood, we had a community engagement campaign, and we knew what we were doing. Our second stop was in East St. Louis, and that truly was in the middle of the pandemic. And so Sheila and I had to think very much outside the box on what did community engagement look like. And so that's when we actually were at the station. We were masked up outside, interviewing riders on what they wanted to see. We've gone back to the old school. We did direct mail, which was very successful in that market. We also held virtual public meetings to make sure that people could hear from our designer and we could hear from them. But again, we were faced with the restrictions of the pandemic. And so we had to find ways to make sure that we were getting to these audiences. The other thing that we considered when we were in East St. Louis is the demographics. And not everyone had a cell phone, or not everyone had access to a computer. So that's why many of our events, while we were socially distanced, were in person at the station or in some of the areas in the neighborhood. There is a senior living center within walking distance of that station. There is a local retail grocery store within walking distance of the East St. Louis station. So we were using neighborhood outlets where people were still going or living in order to make sure that we were engaging the community on what they wanted to see. The other group that we engaged was the operators. And I think it's really important that when you're talking about transit, you try to look at as many of the groups represented as possible to hear what they think is important at these stops and stations.
It's not only the different audiences, but the different methods. And Kim talked a little bit about that, but it could be something as simple as having a listening board posted and people can put a sticker on it, or it's an online survey, or again, it's bringing people together online and just having that dialogue, the conversation, and doing a capture that way. Each time we've done a stop, it's been a little different on how we engage, not only because we've learned, but also because of the community and how they engage. And so having the boards at the grocery store in East St. Louis was critical. It's the only grocery store in the whole city, which is shocking for a community that has over 50,000 people and it has one grocery store. So it's critical to be in those places where people are. And that was one of the things that was really important to us.
I just wanted to add, Jeff, that it has been really important to Sheila and I that these not be cookie cutter transformations. So we definitely want to hear from the residents and the riders, because when we leave, they own it. And we don't want every transformation to look alike. We truly want it to reflect the neighborhood and the communities and the riders that are going back and forth across those stations or stops.
Well, I was going to ask, you said folks had drawings of some of the things that they wanted. I'm curious if you had any favorite ones or anyone that stood out to you that you remember. Maybe some kid drew a dinosaur at a transit stop or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? One of the kids at the very first stop, he drew a porch swing. And so we incorporated the glider into it, so that was a cool one. I think that for each stop, we've engaged with the community. Like for Emerson Park, we had the high school students contribute drawings of what the community meant to them, and we incorporated them into this mural. And it is just an amazing mural that we had a local artist do. And we're using high school students' contributions for our last station, the station we're just finishing as well. So it's, just getting those ideas from them. Some of them are kind of funky and no dinosaurs, but
We've done 3 of these now. Is there a common theme that goes throughout all of them in terms of what communities are asking for? And on the other side of that, is there something, you mentioned each one is a little bit different, but what are some of those different pieces that people want in these different communities?
I think for each of them, there have been some common things that people want. They want more seating. They want shade. They want lighting, depending on what the station. We've had some of the stations who've upgraded their lighting, so lighting's not as big of an issue. And then public facilities, restrooms have been like the top things. And those are really from the users. And then when we say, well, what about if we had color or something interactive? And they're like, that doesn't even occur to people that would be a possibility, because as Kim likes to say, we have a sea of gray at most of these stops. And so when we show them what could be, then they're like, yeah, we need that, whatever that is. So, but the color has been a big thing in the end.
Like those colorful triangular awnings that you have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or even just the hopscotch thing that we did at Maplewood. So cheap, paint on the concrete. But we find, kids doing it and grandmothers doing it with those grandchildren. I mean, it's very, very cool.
Also, when we talk about color, I think each of these stations has requested some element of art, whether it's art to represent the community that they're in. For example, the city of Maplewood, there is now a sign that was done by a local artist. On one side, it tells you that you have arrived in Maplewood, but on the back of it is pretty much a mural of different landmarks within Maplewood. And this sign is interactive and can move. In East St. Louis, it was the art on the pavement, as well as this mural that Sheila was just talking about that we were able to do through an AARP Community Challenge grant. Those things, those art pieces truly reverse the sea of gray at these stations, whether it's the pavement or the balustrades or the walls at the stations, everything is currently gray. And so these pieces of art bring that color, but I think they also bring life and interactive play at the stations as well. And that's something that we definitely have heard from all of the groups when we've done the different stations. Now, the one that we're currently working on that's going to open in a week and a half, the community there, the city of Belleville in Illinois, is very interested in the arts community. They host, I believe, the second largest art fair in the country on an annual basis. And so this theme of art grows in Belleville was a result of the community engagement and the writer engagement. So at that station, we have been able to bring color in multiple ways, including some window artwork on the facility that's there, as well as ground paint, as well as we have transformed the crosswalk, Jeff, into some colorful, interactive space. So as you're crossing lanes, you're going to be entertained there as well. So everywhere we have gone, color has really, really been something that is of interest to individuals who have weighed in on these projects. And it usually comes out in the form of art in one way or another.
Now, what's the role of each of the organizations that gets involved in these projects?
Yeah, it varies. So ARP and CMT are the mothership. So we own the program, so to speak. We do have pretty much, though, everything funnels through CMT, just from organizational standpoint, it's easy to have one entity that has the MOUs with everybody and is a paying vehicle. However, we do have the last two stops we've worked on. We have a transit agency that has really picked up the bulk of the capital on that. And so they've played a bigger role in those last two projects. So, each one's different. And again, it's like with the community engagement part, we're learning with this, and we bring different players in each time. We're starting our fourth one where we have a firm from Texas that's working with us on it. So that's kind of different because they're far away. And how to manage that. And so each one's just slightly different, but we do have lots of MOUs in place as we go through the process.
I also think a couple of critical partners, if people are considering doing these type of projects in other communities across the country, most of our projects have a local government partner. So I think, our first pilot project, the city of Maplewood, played a critical role in us being able to transform the area that we were working in. The city of Belleville has been a great partner when we're there. Other groups that organizations might consider are the realtors. So they have been a great partner for us in the last two projects, and they are going to be a partner as well on the one that we will be working on next. So I think that when people are considering, looking at transforming a bus stop or transforming a station in their communities, they really think outside the box, because, who knew that a small regional advocacy organization for transit and AARP could be such a winning partnership, but also think outside the box on your other partners. Realtors play a big role in communities, and what the community looks like impacts what their industry. So they're very interested in being able to work with groups on improving transit in the community. And so they have been a great partner. But, think outside the box. You'd be amazed how many people want to be involved in a project that, while it's a soft touch, really changes what their community looks like.
What is it that you tell folks when you're trying to get them involved? Like, what's the pitch? I mean, what's the pitch to like the realtors? Like, what do you say to them to be like, hey, this is, obviously they have a vested interest in the neighborhood, but I'm curious if there's any magic words that can get folks involved or get them kind of interested in the project, at least to come take a look at what you've already done so that maybe they can get some ideas about something they might want to do.
I think right now they come to us more wanting to be involved because they have seen the results of the work that we've done so far. In fact, the Real Estate Association in the St. Louis area came to us and said, when are you coming back to Missouri? Because we want to be a part of it. So I think people are really energized by it. They want to be associated with it. But the others that say we don't have a relationship, I'll give you the example. The very first one, the property was owned by a bank. The bus stop was owned by the bank. And he really did not want to be a part of the project. And Kim and I were trying to do our sell job. And until he actually saw what it could look like and heard some of the community response to the idea, then he started coming on. And now he just is thrilled that he has this bus stop right across from his bank and that he was a part of this and he had a role in it. So I think it's just exposing people to what could be and the benefit to them.
It seems like changing their perception and their reality a little bit too.
Yeah. So the Maplewood one, the bus stop used to be right in front of the bank. They didn't want it there because they didn't want those people in front of their bank. They moved it. Yeah. They moved it across the street and for that reason. And then now it's a very, it's a hot spot. It's cool. So, yep. It is changing perspective.
And we are the show me state, Jeff. So once we had one or two of these under our belt, each one that we transform is just another added bonus for individuals being like, they are actually doing something. Like this isn't a figment of their imagination. So each and every one we transform, our portfolio is growing. And partners, as Sheila said, are coming to us. And I think it's more of they are delivering, and this is making a positive impact in communities and around transit. And we could be a part of this. So I think it is a little bit of, if you build it, they will come. And that's truly what Sheila and I have seen around these transformations.
I think one of the other things is we make it easy to be a part of what we're doing. So we really try and find out, why do they want to be a part? What's going to benefit them? What's in it for them, and try and capitalize on that. I think that's probably one of the biggest things is, how are they going to win with this, or how are they not going to lose? So talking about our project we're working on, we're just kicking off. We have to make sure that it's very low maintenance, whatever we create at this particular station, because that's important to the transit agency. So as long as we keep saying that's what we're going to do, then they come in, and then they're willing to give a little more. And I think that is, we've just been able to pay attention and listen to what they want, and then respond accordingly. In the end, it's not ours. It's theirs. It's the people who use the station, the people who manage the station. We're coming in to throw some love into it and then celebrate that.
So Sheila just touched a little bit on what I was just going to say. I mean, the other thing that is happening is the fact that when we're transforming these stations, the riders are taking ownership. So one of our partners in East St. Louis was the St. Clair County Transit District, the transit district that manages the transit service on the Illinois portion of our alignment in the St. Louis region. And when we transformed the Emerson Park Station, since the transformation, the transit district employees have stated over and over again, there has not been one issue with graffiti. There is no trash anymore at the station. Riders will remark to employees, their ambassadors, and others who are working at the station, this is great. We want to make sure our station stays looking like this. So riders are actually taking ownership of these transformed stations. Maybe before they felt like no one cared or no one was really making an effort, but the riders are now making an effort to ensure that what has been completed at those stations is maintained and it continues to look good, because they now consider it theirs, which is really an interesting dynamic that we didn't anticipate, but that has also been an impetus for the St. Clair County Transit District to continue down the path with us in transforming other stations, because they've seen the response from their riders as well.
The other thing that's happened with that is they have increased their investment in the site as well. So they piped in music. So we have piped in music at that station that is relevant to the community. And the other thing is we have planters there that change the plant stock out seasonally, and it stays. It does not disappear. I mean, so there's that pride and that, sense of, like Kim said, that sense of ownership and respect for the station. You'll find transit riders dancing as they're walking from the bus stop to the train, So, I mean, it's very cool. It's an energizing thing. It feels good. And then maybe, Kim, you want to share about the grant that they got as a result of?
Sure. So the Emerson Park Station in East St. Louis, part of what we did is we used that as a starting point for going for additional grant funding for investment in that station. And they have been able to leverage what we have done there and secure a $9.7 million grant from Illinois, a Rebuild Illinois grant to bring infrastructure and jobs actually to that station. So they're going to be building a facility there where there will be jobs, there will be amenities for riders and operators. There will also be a 911 dispatch center there. So, I mean, what we're doing at some of these stations is we're actually taking it and leveraging those investments and going after further investment to increase the footprint at those stations.
Now, with the transit agencies, it seems like they're into it now, but were there any, was there any push to get them involved, or did you have to change any rules to get them kind of on board to start with?
So probably the thing that worked in our favor is we started with one where the transit agency owned nothing except for the sign on the light pole. And then the next one, the St. Clair County Transit District was the lead and the funder, and the overall transit agency was consulted from safety and security, those kinds of sight lines and everything to make sure we were good. I think how we eased into it with them so they could see that it was successful has been a big thing. The other thing is Kim's brilliant about building her board of directors, and the CEO of Bi-State Development, which Metro is under, is on her board, and he's all in. He supports the program completely. So it's been strategic, definitely.
I think the other thing that we have done well, and we fell into it, the first one, is we have chronicled these projects from beginning to end. So we are creating videos that allow individuals, stakeholders, the transit agency to weigh in on the importance of these transformations. And what we've actually found is that the transit agency, once we had Maplewood, and when they saw the impact of what we were able to do, they've been a part of our ad campaign now. They're 100% on board, but the videos have allowed us to move not only the transit agency, but elected officials and others further, because they're showing the transformation in 2 minutes. So we don't need to have anyone's attention beyond a 2-minute video, but they demonstrate just how impactful these can be in communities. And not only is the transit agency on board, but now we're having elected officials in these different communities actually come to us and say, I want that in my community, which is very helpful when you're dealing with political entities, when you're trying to get some things done at these stations.
And that's what happened with the one we're finishing up right now. The mayor of Belleville, she came to our Emerson Park ribbon cutting, and she said she wanted that. And not only is she supporting it through her words and whatever you need, but financially as well. So, pennies do not fall from heaven on this. So it takes some time to figure out how we're going to pay for these things. And not only on the front end, but also then the maintenance. The maintenance is probably our trickiest thing to figure out when we're negotiating. So is who's going to maintain this before we step away?
Well, that's a good question, is like, how much do these projects cost typically? And how much does the capital part of it cost, but how much does the maintenance generally cost?
So we like to say that these are low budget projects with big impact. So these projects are coming in under $100,000 each transformation. So in the grand scheme of things, they truly are a low budget projects. And what we have found is we're not asking the transit agency for investment on the front end for the capital side, but that's where the transit agency has been pivotal moving forward on the ones that we have recently done, the ones at the light rail stations. They have agreed to maintain what we have done. So that's a significant win for us, because Sheila and I can't stay around and make sure that the thermoplastic paint on the concrete doesn't peel off, or, that the plants need to be changed out on a regular basis, the plant stock. So the transit agencies in our area have stepped up to the plate with regard to the back end of these projects. They're saying, if you can deliver these projects, we will be your partner and we will maintain them moving forward.
The Maplewood one, the city of Maplewood, they agreed to maintain the site. So that one's a little different, and because the bank owns, so the bank manages some pieces of it, but the city has agreed to maintain that.
Do you have to sign agreements with the transit agency or anybody else, like a MOU or anything like that, to get things going, to make sure that these agreements stay in place over time?
I'll let Kim speak to that.
Yes.
Kim and I always have an agreement, and then Kim will do it with the other entities.
Yes. So we most definitely have created MOUs because we want to ensure that once these projects are finished, someone is maintaining them and everyone knows their roles and responsibilities going into the creation of these transformation projects. Collaboration, it has been a key part of the success of these projects, collaboration with all of these different partners, but we do want to make sure that there's no gray areas. And so we do have MOUs from the very beginning with all of the partners, so everyone understands their roles and what the expectations are in order to bring these projects to fruition.
Now, I've seen in the news lately that there's planning for more light rail transit in the region from the North-South project and other things. I'm curious if you have your eyes on that alignment to see if you can't get some transformations going on some of those stops that might be popping up in the future.
So we're actually very lucky where we are in this region right now. There's actually an expansion underway in Illinois for light rail. That one is actually moving into final construction, and hopefully they will move ground beginning at the end of this year. And so we have already had conversations with our partners over there about, well, why don't we do this from the get-go for that new station at the end of that expansion project? The north side, south side is the other corridor that you are referencing, I believe, Jeff, that has been in all of the St. Louis news in the last couple of weeks. And that project will transverse the downtown area and then go north and south out of the central business district in downtown St. Louis. And we know that there will be opportunities around that, but that project, we haven't jumped on board yet, right, Sheila? We still have a few more in line on what we're working on now. That is something that organizations should think about if they consider, we have the capacity for about 2 transformations a year right now. We don't want to take on too many. I think as part of our goal, we want to make sure that the projects that we have under construction or under design are good, and that we know what the community wants and we do our due diligence. So we have been very cautious in how many projects we take on each year. We know that 2 is good. We dipped our toes this year into 2 with 1 just beginning conversations, but we know our capacity, and we definitely don't want to go outside of that and not deliver on what we've seen so far as successes.
Bottom line, it's 2 people. So it's Kim and I. Because
your capacity.
I'm an office of 1. Kim's an office of 2.5 right now. So there can be a lot that can be accomplished. I mean, if you think about that there's only 2 of us, it's just figuring out how to get more from others and, inviting them in to be part of the party. And so far, we've been successful.
Well, how about the stations themselves? What's involved in this from a transportation perspective? It is the bus stop or transit stop in general, but are you thinking multimodally? Are there places to think about mobility hubs or anything like that? Have you thought about those connections that can be made in those specific geographic areas?
So our first stop was indeed just a bus stop, but the next 2 were transit centers, so bus and train. But this one that we're on right now, that's bus train, but it also has a bike trail. It has the largest bike trail system in that part of the state in Illinois, in St. Clair County. So it truly is multimodal there. The trail goes right next to the light rail, and then there's the bus. So it's all connected there. We really think that is a bonus, because the cyclists are going by, or walkers are going by, strollers are going by on a regular basis. And it's really used as a connector place. So, and really seeing that this could be a community hub in that it's so close to the downtown. It has train, it has bus, it has space for walking, for pedestrians. So with our ribbon cutting, which Kim, I'll let Kim talk more about too, but we're going to have a big event where it's Passport to Music on Metro. And there's going to be a big event there with live music, and then at our other station as well that we've done. So really trying to bring life to it and connecting the community to the station.
The Belleville station is the most multimodal station in St. Clair County, Illinois, the Illinois portion of the alignment. It also has the introduction of microtransit at that station. And so that was part of what we were discussing. Part of that multimodal, we kept that in mind when we were looking at our design. So we have included specially designed bike racks for that station as well as a part of this transformation, to make sure that we are not missing the bike and ped portion of those individuals crossing this station and not just focusing on bus and train. So we tried to be as multimodal as possible when we were thinking about the design of that station. Now, our future station, our 4th stop, that is the design concept, is currently being worked on. That one is a significant bus train connection point in St. Louis County in our region. And so there are 11 bus routes that traverse this station that we're going to be looking at next. And that was part of the reason that we chose this station, is because we want to make sure that these connection points really feel welcoming and inviting for transit riders. And so this station is another one that is a complete sea of gray and that has a significant amount of unused parking at this stop. And so by transforming the area around the station, there's lots of conversation about what could be on that parking lot that we're probably not going to touch. But hopefully, once again, we can tee up future development adjacent to the station. And so we're trying to be very strategic when we look at spots. We're also trying to be geographically dispersed. So we don't want to concentrate all of our efforts in one area of the region. You know, right now we have done a small municipality. We have done East St. Louis. We've kind of done a suburban community in St. Clair County, Illinois. And now we're doing the only stop in what's considered unincorporated St. Louis County, the only stop that falls under our county government. And so we're trying to be geographically dispersed as we work on these stations too.
The other thing with this particular station that Kim's talking about, our one that we're just starting on, it's the first stop after people leave the airport, or the last stop before you get to the airport. And we found out recently that pilots and travelers, they'll park there and then take the train there to the airport, which is something we didn't know. But the diversity of the people who use this station and how it's going to respond to those needs, I think kind of twisted a little bit after we were doing the on-site, just initial conversations. And so I think that's another thing when you're looking at this, don't come in thinking, really come in with an open mind and go, wow. Like we saw this older gentleman, beautiful tan, pulling a little suitcase behind him. We're like, are you going on the trip? Yeah, I'm just going for a couple of days, I park here and then I go home, So I just think keep your open mind about how a site is used and how it could be used.
Well, that's another question I have is like, how do you measure these outcomes of the guy pulling his suitcase on a 2-day trip for a weekend or something along those lines? How do you measure and take stock of the impact that the station transformations have had?
So we've actually been talking about that, Jeff. How do we measure success? And currently we are measuring success with the number of organizations that come to us after we unveil or hold a ribbon cutting and say, hey, we want you to come to our neighborhood next and do this bus stop or this station. But we're also looking at building metrics. So what does that exit survey look like, or that exit community engagement? Tell us what you think. Tell us what works, what doesn't work. So that's part of the conversation that we're having right now is how do we find out after we've left 6 months later, is the impact still there? What is happening? Right now we're counting it anecdotally. So we know that we were able to use the Emerson Park investment to leverage a larger grant and bring more to that community. We know that riders at the Emerson Park station are saying, hey, we love this station. We're going to make sure it's clean. We know that there's no graffiti. We're seeing that there's no trash, and maintenance has not been an issue at that station. But we would like to have some more detailed information as well. So that is part of the conversation that we're having as a partnership, is how do we develop metrics as a part of an exit kind of strategy from those bus stops or those stations.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, Kim. It's been more anecdotal right now. Transit users or the providers, the operators saying what a pleasant experience, if people are happier and there is less destruction. And again, the partners coming forward and saying, we want to be a part of this. But yeah, if we were doing a grant report, it'd be a little hard to measure outcomes at this time. So I think, again, we're still forming that.
If somebody wanted to copy this in another place, are there any lessons that you all take from doing this work that you think that others should know before they embark on the journey?
I think one of the things Kim had indicated it, and I used this phrase before, but some of younger individuals did not understand what strange bedfellows. So just don't close yourself off of who could be a partner. Cast a wide net and be thankful for, who you get to come in and join you on the journey. I think that's one thing. I think another is listen, listen, listen. So don't come in with the preconceived notion. And I believe testing some things in advance, like we did. We did these pop-up markets. We really saw that people were drawn to them. They were drawn to color and interaction, and it made people happy. A smile came up, and it was like, oh, okay, well, this is cool. I didn't even know this was here, or that kind of stuff. So I think that just being open and listen and creative for funding purposes, and get those champions that have influence.
I would add two other things that Sheila's spot on all of the items she had listed. The only other two things I would say is that on the onset of your project, make sure the goals are clearly delineated prior to hitting the go button. Make sure everyone is on the same page on what your goals are. And we learn each and every time we do one of these projects, but we learn that from the very beginning, that make sure everyone's on the same page with goals. And then make sure everyone knows what their role and their responsibilities are. And that has been very helpful through the process. It was a little muddy the first couple of times, but we have learned how to streamline and how to make sure we know that Sheila's doing this and I'm doing this and all of these other partners are doing this. So making sure that that's very clear and you're upfront about what the goals are helps everyone stay on the same page and bring these projects to fruition for sure.
Yeah. And I think that continual conversation. Yeah. So we meet on a regular basis with the team that's working on this. So the designer, the project managers, us, anyone else that we need to have at the table, so that the communication piece is critical. And every single one of our projects has been different of how we managed it. So we do not have the end all be all system, but we do have a lot of lessons learned that we're happy to share.
What do you all think is the most underrated outcome of these projects? Something that you didn't expect to happen, or maybe something that is really important, but it kind of passes under a lot of people's radars generally?
From my opinion, as the transit advocacy organization, the rider ownership of these stops and stations that have been transformed has been beyond what I ever conceived when we started these projects. Our goal at the beginning was to make the environment more friendly, more interactive for both riders and residents. But the fact that riders are considering these their stations now, and they're like, well, what about this other stop that I go to all the time? We should really look at that stop. And we're like, okay, we'll add that to our list for consideration. But the pride that transit riders in the St. Louis market now have around some of these stations, and we've heard from lots of naysayers. This is not all rainbows and unicorns around public transit, right? We know that. And naysayers are saying, well, you think putting a bench in is going to increase ridership on the system? But it's more about showing that we care about the system that riders are using and understand that, seating and shade and color and other amenities go a long way when you're in between a bus, or you're waiting for a bus or a train, or you're riding by yourself and it might not be daylight anymore, or these things that create this environment that makes these riders feel safer, makes them happier. If we can generate a smile at the Emerson Park Station with a little jazz music as they're waiting on the train, we've gone a long way. But really, I think the outcome that I did not anticipate was the pride and the ownership on the part of the riders. And that just makes us so ecstatic as the Regional Transit Advocacy Organization, because part of our goal is to ensure riders are enjoying the environment in which they're traveling.
I think for me, it would be bringing people in that never would imagine using transit before, and their experience. I hope that would happen. I hope that they would feel more comfortable for whatever reason. If the color and the energy around our transformations make them feel more comfortable, great. From an AARP perspective, I want to make sure that transit stops and transit in general feel safe and secure and accessible to people of all ages, specifically people 50 plus. And when people stop driving, they need to be able to have access. And so this has been an important piece for me, is if you activate the space and they feel safe. We are hearing that, and we're hearing it from people who think they don't have access to transit, but it's really there. They just don't think it's there. And once we expose them to it and to one of these stops, they're like, wow, this is cool. I think I'm going to use transit now. So broadening the audience or the users of transit is really important and has been a nice surprise as well.
I think I would be remiss if I did not say this. We were talking about partners earlier, but I think if people are considering, transforming a bus stop or looking at these locations in their communities, they should really reach out to AARP, because this is a plug for Sheila. They're an exceptional partner on the ground. They have a significant constituent base, and they do incredible work in communities. And our partnership with AARP in the St. Louis market has allowed us to do this many stations. And so when you're thinking about partners or collaborators in your communities, you should really think about giving AARP a call, because I think that they're willing to talk about things that you might not consider a transit falling under the AARP umbrella, but it does, and it fits their mission. And we are strange bedfellows, but it's working. So I think it's something to really consider in communities that people don't think about.
Totally. And AARP, they have such a good regional but also a national presence in terms of placemaking and transit and all those things that we care about. So it's a good organization to think of in that way. Where can folks find more information about the station transformations if they want to read more or reach out to you all if they have any questions?
They can go straight to our website at cmt-stl.org. We actually highlight each and every one of the stations that we've transformed to date. There's also those videos that we talked about that show the transformation from start to finish. There will be a how-to. We're working on that next, because we've had lots of people reach out to us about how do we do this in our own community. So we're starting to put together lessons learned that we've learned here in the St. Louis region, and hopefully those help others with their projects as well.
That's awesome. Well, Kim and Sheila, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We get excited to talk about this. We want more people to know about it, and we want more people to do it so we can learn from them as well.
Exactly.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and published first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this week's show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Find us at patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. And you can sign up for our 16-year-old newsletter at TheOverheadWire.com. And you can also listen to our show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.